How sad of a reality has it become in Canada, where the only way a young person can ever hope to buy a house is that they have rich parents that can co-sign on their mortgage and gift them a couple $100,000 for a down payment? Yeah, let's chat about it. Hey there and welcome back. In this week's video, I want to go through the monthly Canadian Real Estate Association stats. It seems like Canadian Real Estate Association is finally willing to accept this is not going to be a good year for the Canadian real estate market. We'll go through some changes coming to Realtor.ca that I think you as a home buyer are going to very much appreciate. Matilda scoured the comments for this week's question of the week, and we've got the best interest rates this week. Then we'll go through and we'll talk about how it seems most young Canadians now feel without rich parents, they're never going to be able to buy a house in Canada. Declines in home sales takes a pause in April, says the Canadian Real Estate Association. When you're looking at this month's stats from the Canadian Real Estate Association, I think it continues to paint a very clear picture in Canada, and that is that there's two very distinct stories going on in the Canadian real estate market. And no, it's not sales plunging and inventory piling up. It's the distinct differences that we see across Canada and how heavily what happens in Toronto and Vancouver weighs on the national stats. And yes, if you're in Toronto or Vancouver, you're trying to sell a house right now, it's awfully difficult and you're probably taking a lot less than you thought you were going to get. So when you look at the headline numbers, you see they're still well below long-term norms, although it seems like maybe the decline might have paused. We'll have to wait and see on that. And prices are continuing to drop with an even larger year-over-year price decline. But of course, if you've been here for a while, you know I tell you all the time, the national stats can be very misleading. And really when you're looking at the national stats, it shows how much of the impact the Toronto and Vancouver real estate markets have on the national numbers. And it makes sense. They're the two largest markets in Canada. If you can take a guess, what do you think is the third largest? Let me know in the comments below. But when you bring up the provincial chart here, you can see that every single province in Canada, except BC and Ontario, has had price increases. And this has been true for the entire year, even while BC and Ontario have had prices down the entire year. And really, you can narrow it down even more from there and say that Toronto, Vancouver, the surrounding communities, that's where they're seeing the price declines. Pretty much every other city in Canada, except Calgary, if you're paying attention, has got year-over-year price increases. And that's why I continue to focus on breaking out individual cities in my monthly Canadian real estate market update. Sneak peek won't be next month, but I am working on adding 𝗥𝗶𝗿𝗁 to the monthly market update in the future. So get subscribed, you don't miss that when I finally add that. And if you want to check out this month's monthly market update, I'll put a link to that in the description below. The Saskatchewan Real Estate Association makes offer dates available on Realtor.ca. The Canadian Real Estate Association continues to improve Realtor.ca. That is who owns and runs Realtor.ca, by the way, if you didn't know that. And I'm super happy because I have been asking for my entire career for the Canadian Real Estate Association to make Realtor.ca the best real estate website in Canada. And it finally seems that they want to listen to me.
Listen.
I said early on in my career that the most powerful marketing tool we have as agents is Realtor.ca, and it has to be the best real estate website in the country. And instead, they made those stupid ads that said essentially, if you don't use a real estate agent, you're a big dummy. And I always hated those ads.
Where's the shipment? What shipment?
We don't know anything.
Stand down. You are not cartel.
Oh no, we're the Lewises. We just bought this house.
Didn't your realtor tell you about this place?
We didn't use a realtor.
I said stand down.
I never like the messaging insulting our future prospective clients by essentially saying they're stupid if they don't use us. So I'm really happy that we've seen some fairly good changes to Realtor.ca over the last year or two. Better transparency, better information for both buyers and sellers. The problem we have is because real estate is provincially regulated, the rules aren't uniform across the country, which means the experience across the country isn't uniform either. If you're looking in Vancouver, you can see sold prices. If you look in Saskatchewan, you won't see it. We do finally have now offer dates available. That's fantastic. Use a buyer no if there is an offer presentation date on a house, and that is how the vast majority of houses right now in Saskatchewan are being sold. So it's good that buyers have this information. Now, if only we could get better uniformity for rules across the country so that the Realtor.ca experience is more consistent for you, the buyer, that would make things a lot better. If you're like many millennials, you probably got the Realtor app on your phone and you're scrolling it. mark in your favorites. Don't worry, I won't tell anybody that you're doing that. But the next step in buying a house is, of course, getting a fantastic real estate agent. And I might know a guy. If you're Regina, I'd be happy to help you, but don't worry, I know a guy just about everywhere else in the country because I've got a great network of agents across the country. If you want to book me in for a buyer's consultation, the link is in the description below. I'll learn about what you're looking for in a real estate agent and get you paired up with the best one in your market. New format here going forward for the week's best interest rates. Not a lot of changes this week. Let's start off by looking at the best insurable mortgage interest rates. But if you have an uninsurable mortgage, TD did have some decent rates this week, and it's a little lower than what we had last week. Taking a look at the big banks' best 5-year fixed insurable rates. CIBC no longer offering that 3.99% interest rate, so we're back above 4%. And TD and RBC swap spots on the leaderboard. But you know what I'm never going to change? My terrible bad dad jokes. What did one slice of bread say to the other before they raced? Your toast. Do you have a great joke I use in the future? Put it in the comments below. Matilda was perusing the comment section this week to answer your questions. So what do you got this week, Matilda?
If someone has a huge down payment, let's say 70%, what type of mortgage would apply? Or perhaps 50%, I figure it would be insured.
So you have 3 types of mortgages in Canada: insured, insurable, and uninsurable. And it's based not only on the down payment amount, but also by what type of occupancy, owner-occupied versus investor property, and the total purchase price. I've got a whole video explaining the 3 different types of mortgages. Instead of repeating myself, I'll link that in the description below. Funny enough, if you're putting a $250,000 down payment on a $300,000 purchase, you actually might struggle to be able to get approved for a mortgage, not because you're not qualified, but because it's too small of a mortgage. Most lenders have a minimum amount they will lend, and typically it falls around $70,000. So in that case, you'd actually have to put less money down to get a mortgage. 1/3 of Canadians say down payment the barrier to buying a house. These next 2 articles kind of tie together what I was talking about in the beginning. There's an entire generation of Canadians feel they're never going to be able to afford to buy a house unless they've got rich parents. If you look at the programs that have been put forward by the government recently when it comes to making housing more affordable, virtually none of them address the down payment problem. Yes, you've got the first home savings account, and I think that's a really good one, but there isn't really that much that's going to make it easier for Canadians to save up for a down payment and build that up. Look at the cost of rent. There's just not much money left over at the end of the month now. So then what could the government possibly do besides just giving people money to save for a down payment? Well, there actually was one government that I thought had a really good idea, and it's from my home province of Saskatchewan. Seriously, hear me out. I actually think this was a really good program. We have what's called graduate retention in Saskatchewan. The idea is to keep recent trade school and university graduates working in the province. They'll give you a tax credit of up to $20,000 depending how long the program was, and it's spaced out over a series of years. What the government offered, and unfortunately only for 1 year, was the ability to withdraw in advance $10,000 of that tax credit to put towards a down payment on a house. And if you're a couple, you could double up and put $20,000 down. And yes, I know if you're from Toronto or Vancouver, $20,000 is peanuts for a down payment when you're going to need a couple $100,000. But in Saskatchewan, that's your entire 5% down payment on the average house. I thought this was a very forward-looking program that the government offered. They've already committed to giving back this money to the people essentially in these tax credits. So why not do something to further reinforce keeping them in the province? If you're buying a house, well, you're probably not moving anytime soon. And if you're buying a house, you've probably also got a fairly stable job, which means you're paying income tax in the province. This to me seemed like a win-win for both buyers and the government. If the government truly wants to address affordability in Canada, I think creative programs like this addressing down payment savings is one of the ways they're going to have to do it. Nearly half of homeowners need help from family to buy their first home. This circles back and kind of proves what I was talking about in the introduction to this video, that there's an entire generation of Canadians that feel unless they have parents that can gift them a couple $100,000 for a down payment, maybe even co-sign and pay part of that mortgage, they're never going to be able to afford to buy a home. So no longer is it buying a home based on your own merit and your abilities, it's whether you got rich parents or not. And remember in last week's video, I talked about the average age of a first-time home buyer in Ontario is now 40 years old. If the dream that most people I believe still have is you grow up, well in my case, probably never gonna grow up, at least according to my wife, And then you're going to go and you're going to get your education, start a job, buy a house, and then hopefully start a family. You can't be starting that at 40 years old. And I know because of the market that I work in, where the price to income ratio is significantly better, that young couples in their early 20s are actually able to afford to buy a house. That skews my perception on the realities of other markets in Canada. And I've got no problem with people that want to be able to help their kids buy a house. I hope in the future I can do the same for my kids. But if that's the only way a young person can afford to buy a house, we've got a real problem in the country. Another thing I found interesting in this survey was that 67% of respondents said they were waiting for interest rates to drop before getting into the housing market. And I'm sure many of them want to just have lower interest rates. That makes sense. But I bet you a large portion of them just simply wouldn't qualify for a mortgage or enough of a mortgage to buy the house they want with the interest rates where they are right now. I want to challenge you guys. Let me know in the comments below. If you had the magic wand to make any policy changes, what would you do to make it easier for young first-time home buyers to get into the market so we don't have an entire generation of Canadians feeling like they've been completely left out and locked out of the housing market?